Imagine it's 29th of June 2015. You are a 58-year-old plumber living in Athens, Greece. You wake before sunrise in a narrow apartment above a bakery where the smell of sesame bread usually drifts through the windows before the city noise begins. You have 2,300 euros in the bank, a little cash in a kitchen jar, and a notebook where you track every bill. Because your wife's medicine, your daughter's bus fare, and the rent on your small workshop all depend on the numbers lining up. Most mornings are simple: coffee, radio, a call from your first client. Then your scooter through streets you have known for decades. You are not rich, but you are careful, and careful people are supposed to be safe. Then the announcer's voice changes. The banks will close, cash withdrawals will be limited. No one knows for how long. If you have ever wondered why ordinary people can do everything right and still get trapped when the system turns, stay with me. What you're about to hear is not a theory. It is a pattern. It has happened before. And it always leaves the same people standing in the same lines, asking the same question. How can my money be mine and still be out of reach? And if you find value in this kind of historical clarity, subscribing takes 2 seconds and keeps you ahead of what most people never see coming. By midday, the ATMs are surrounded. Pensioners wait in the heat. Supermarket lines grow longer. Pharmacies start asking quiet questions about supply. On paper, your savings still exist. On the screen, the balance is still there. But a bank balance in a crisis can become like a bridge painted on a wall. It looks solid until you try to cross it. Greece would impose a 60 euro daily withdrawal limit, and for millions of people, the lesson was immediate and brutal. Access matters as much as ownership. A promise matters only when the system can still keep it. And this is what this video is really about. Not panic, not prophecy. Pattern recognition. History shows that huge numbers of people are financially unprepared, not because they are lazy or foolish, but because modern systems train them to feel safe in places that are only safe while the machinery is running. When debt piles high, when currencies weaken, when banks depend on confidence, and when everyday life becomes more digital and more centralized, the average person is often standing on a frozen lake in spring. It looks firm right up until the moment it does not. Before we go further, there is something important to understand. Most financial disasters do not begin with poor people making bad choices. They begin with a deeper mismatch. Families save in money, wages, pensions, and bank deposits, but the system above them runs on debt, leverage, and trust. Leverage means using borrowed money to make bets or expand faster. It is like building a tall house on stilts. It works wonderfully in calm weather and terribly in a storm. When that taller system starts to wobble, the shock rarely lands first on the people who designed it. It lands on the people who trusted it. That is the secret key. Most households store their safety in what economists would call nominal assets. Nominal just means fixed in name. A bank deposit says 10,000. A pension promise says a monthly amount. A salary says a number on a contract. But the real value of those things depends on 3 quiet conditions staying intact at the same time. The currency must hold value, the institution must remain open, and the government must choose not to change the rules. If even one of those pillars cracks, what looked like security can melt like snow on a warm roof. This is why the same story keeps returning in different costumes. In one country, the threat is inflation, which means prices rise so fast that cash loses buying power by the week. In another, it is devaluation, which means the local currency suddenly buys far less against stronger foreign money. In another, it is a bank freeze, a bail-in, or capital controls, which means your money may exist legally but not practically. The names change, the pain does not. The floor gives way in different rooms of the same house, and the scale of unpreparedness is real. According to the S&P Global Financial Literacy Survey, only 33% of adults worldwide are financially literate, meaning roughly 3.5 billion adults do not understand basic concepts. These concepts include inflation, risk, and compound interest. The World Bank's Global Findex found a similar trend. In developing economies, only 55% of adults could access extra emergency funds within 30 days without much difficulty. In other words, even before a true crisis arrives, large parts of the world are already one broken paycheck away. One closed bank or one currency shock away from exposure. The system does not fail all at once. It fails by revealing who had a margin of safety and who only had a story. This brings us directly to the first part of the pattern. Most people do not prepare for the money itself to break. They prepare for rain, sickness, job loss, maybe even recession. But they do not prepare for the unit that measures their life to dissolve. Look at Germany in 1923. The famous images are almost too dramatic to believe. Children stacking bricks of banknotes, housewives carrying bundles of cash in baskets, workers rushing from the factory to the bakery before prices changed again. But those scenes were the ending, not the cause. The rot was in the beams long before the roof came down. Before the First World War, $1 US bought a little over 4 German marks. During the war, Germany abandoned its gold backing and leaned on borrowing. After the war came reparations. Political turmoil and the burden of a damaged economy followed, trying to pay foreign obligations with weakening domestic currency. For a while, the numbers still looked survivable. By 1920, the mark had lost much of its value, yet the system staggered on. Then the state kept printing. More notes, more promises, more paper chasing fewer goods. By July 1922, according to Britannica, prices had risen by about 700%. Then came hyperinflation. This means prices rising at a speed so extreme that money becomes stale almost as soon as you receive it. By November 1923, one US dollar was worth 1 trillion marks. Not 1 million, not 1 billion, 1 trillion. Imagine measuring your family budget with a ruler that shrinks every hour. That was daily life. What did ordinary people experience? Not charts, not abstractions, humiliation. Currency must hold value. The institution must remain open. And the government must choose not to change the rules. If even one of those pillars cracks, what looked like security can melt like snow on a warm roof. This is why the same story keeps returning in different costumes. In one country, the threat is inflation, which means prices rise so fast that cash loses buying power by the week. In another, it is devaluation, which means the local currency suddenly buys far less against stronger foreign money. In another, it is a bank freeze, a bail-in or capital controls, which means your money may exist legally but not practically. The names change. The pain does not. The floor gives way in different rooms of the same house, and the scale of unpreparedness is real. According to the S&P Global Financial Literacy Survey, only 33% of adults worldwide are financially literate, meaning roughly 3.5 billion adults do not understand basic concepts like inflation, risk, and compound interest. The World Bank's Global Findex found that in developing economies, only 55% of adults could access extra emergency funds within 30 days without much difficulty. In other words, even before a true crisis arrives, large parts of the world are already one broken paycheck, one closed bank, or one currency shock away from exposure. The system does not fail all at once. It fails by revealing who had a margin of safety and who only had a story. This brings us directly to the first part of the pattern. Most people do not prepare for the money itself to break. They prepare for rain, sickness, job loss, maybe even recession. But they do not prepare for the unit that measures their life to start dissolving in their hands. Look at Germany in 1923. The famous images are almost too dramatic to believe. Children stacking bricks of banknotes, housewives carrying bundles of cash in baskets, workers rushing from the factory to the bakery before prices changed again. But those scenes were the ending, not the cause. The rot was in the beams long before the roof came down. Before the First World War, one US dollar bought a little over 4 German marks during the war. Germany abandoned its gold backing and leaned on borrowing. After the war came reparations, political turmoil, and the burden of a damaged economy trying to pay hard foreign obligations with a weakening domestic currency. For a while, the numbers still looked survivable. By 1920, the mark had lost much of its value. Yet the system staggered on. Then the state kept printing. More notes, more promises, more paper chasing fewer goods. By July 1922, according to Britannica, prices had risen by about 700%. Then came hyperinflation, which means prices rising at a speed so extreme that money becomes stale almost as soon as you receive it. By November 1923, one US dollar was worth 1 trillion marks, not 1 million, not 1 billion, 1 trillion. Imagine measuring your family budget with a ruler that shrinks every hour. That was daily life. What did ordinary people experience? Not charts, not abstractions. Humiliation. Wage earners were paid and told to spend immediately. A coffee that cost 5,000 marks could cost 7,000 a few minutes later. Pensioners who had saved for decades saw those savings collapse into near nothing. Shopkeepers could not restock shelves fast enough. Farmers refused to hand over food for currency they no longer trusted. Food riots broke out. Law and order frayed. Savings, in effect, were ice cubes dropped onto hot iron. And here is the part many people still miss. Hyperinflation does not punish everyone equally. It is a transfer machine. People with fixed salaries, cash savings, and pensions are often crushed first because their claims are frozen while prices run away. People with debts can sometimes benefit because they repay yesterday's loans with today's worthless money. Owners of land, tools, inventory, or foreign currency often have a better chance of holding value because they own something outside the burning paper. In Weimar Germany, the middle-class saver was often the loser. The debtor, the exporter, and the owner of real goods could be in a very different position. That is why these episodes are so psychologically destructive. They shatter the moral logic people live by. Work hard, save steadily, avoid waste. Trust the bank, trust the currency. Yet when the storm comes, It is often not the disciplined saver, but the person with the right structure of assets, debts, and access who survives best. History can be merciless that way. It does not grade virtue, it grades exposure, and this is where history gets uncomfortable. The people least prepared are often not reckless people at all. They are the people who did exactly what stable societies teach them to do. Keep your savings in the bank, hold cash for emergencies. Trust the monthly pension. Believe that numbers in an account mean stored time. In quiet periods, that is true enough. In monetary breakdowns, it can become tragically false. A currency crisis is like termites in a house frame. The walls look fine until someone leans on them. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If Weimar Germany shows what happens when the money itself collapses, Argentina in 2001 shows what happens when the bank promise breaks. Here is something I want you to think about before we go further. If your bank told you that your money was safe, but only 250 pesos a week was really yours to touch, would you still call it savings? Drop your answer in the comments. Seriously. Because what I am about to show is the part of this story that most people never hear. And it changes everything. By the late 1990s, Argentina looked stable on the surface. For years, the peso had been pegged 1-to-1 with the US dollar under the convertibility system. That peg acted like a polished shop window. From the street, everything looked orderly. But inside, the business was running out of stock. The country had heavy debts, weak growth, and a system that relied on confidence remaining intact. As long as people believed the peso and the dollar were twins, the arrangement could survive. The moment they stopped believing, the resemblance became a costume. The run came fast. According to the IMF, private sector deposits fell by more than $3.6 billion, about 6% of the deposit base, in just 3 days between November 28th and November 30th, 2001. That is how trust often dies. Not in one theatrical moment, but in a rush of ordinary people deciding they would rather hold cash than promises. The government responded with the Corralito, a set of restrictions that limited individual cash withdrawals to 250 pesos a week. The name means Little Corral. And that is exactly how it felt. Money fenced in, citizens outside the gate. Reuters later reported that around $40 billion in deposits were frozen from the end of 2001 through 2002. On December 23, 2001, Argentina declared its intention to default on government debt. The peso-dollar link broke apart. By June 2002, the peso had fallen to around $3.90 per US dollar. Output fell by about 20% over 3 years. Unemployment rose above 20%. Millions of middle-class Argentines were shoved toward poverty. Riots broke out. ATMs were vandalized. Supermarkets were looted. The balance in the account had not vanished in name, but the life it was supposed to buy had been slashed in half or worse. Think about the ordinary saver. Inside that machine, a teacher, a mechanic, a widow who had spent 20 years building a nest egg. Nest egg means savings set aside slowly, like a bird building a shelter twig by twig. They were not speculators. They were not political insiders. They simply believed that a dollar in the bank was a dollar. Then rules changed, deposits were frozen, dollar claims were trapped. And later, through forced conversions and devaluation, many discovered that the number they had trusted was not the thing they thought they owned. This is the core mechanism. A banking system can look liquid, which means able to pay depositors on demand, until too many people ask for their money at once. Banks do not keep every depositor's cash waiting in a vault. They lend it, invest it, or pledge it elsewhere. That model works in normal times because not everyone asks at once. But when trust breaks, the system reveals its shape. It is not a warehouse. It is a bridge built on expected behavior. Argentina also reveals another cruel fact. When governments face impossible choices, they often spread losses in ways that are politically survivable, not morally fair. Some losses land through inflation, some through devaluation, some through freezing deposits, some through converting currencies by decree. To the saver, these are different technical words for the same emotional experience. A ruler comes into your house and shortens your tape measure. Who came through better? Historically, the people with actual dollars outside the system. Income linked to exports, useful hard assets, or the flexibility to move quickly were often in a stronger position. Reuters interviewed a 70-year-old Argentine woman named Stella years later, and her conclusion was simple. She preferred to keep her savings at home, not because that is ideal, because once trust is broken, memory becomes a second currency. People start hoarding experience as much as cash. This leads to the second part. In modern life, most people no longer think of bank access as a privilege. They think of it as a permanent background condition, like running water or streetlights. But history says that is a dangerous assumption, once your life is fully connected. To cards, accounts, apps, and payroll systems, a financial interruption does not just reduce wealth. It reduces movement, it narrows choices, it turns adults into petitioners. That is exactly what Lebanon showed after 2019. Lebanon's collapse did not arrive like a lightning strike. It was more like a beautiful building sinking into soft ground while the lobby music kept playing. After the Civil War, the country rebuilt on debt, remittances, and foreign inflows. For years, Lebanon looked like a service economy with polished surfaces, dollar prices, luxury shops, and a banking culture. Underneath, however, governments kept borrowing, banks kept lending to the state, and the system became dangerously dependent on new dollars continuing to arrive. Reuters described the setup in blunt terms as a nationally regulated Ponzi scheme, meaning a structure that keeps paying old promises only as long as new money keeps entering. Lebanon's public debt had reached about 150% of national output before the crash. In 2016, banks began offering remarkable interest rates on fresh dollar deposits and even higher rates on Lebanese pound deposits. To ordinary savers, this looked like reward. In reality, it was often a distress signal wearing cologne. Then, the inflows slowed, politics hardened, aid stalled. Protest erupted in October 2019 after planned attacks. WhatsApp calls became the final insult in a country under strain. Foreign exchange dried up, savers lined up, banks shut their doors. The dollar accounts that many Lebanese thought were their shield became cages. According to Reuters, depositors were locked out of dollar accounts or told funds were worth a fraction. The currency then collapsed with stunning violence. Reuters reported the Lebanese pound had lost about 98% of its value. The government estimated losses in the financial system at more than $70 billion. Triple-digit inflation spread, poverty widened, emigration accelerated. Time itself became unstable. Prices changed, salaries lagged, plans shrank from years to days. What did ordinary people experience? A slow-motion confiscation. Families who had done what responsible families are told to do, save in the bank, hold deposits in dollars, found that dollars in the statement were not the same as dollars in the hand. The economy split into two realities. There were fresh dollars in cash, and there were trapped dollars inside the bank. Two things with almost the same name, two radically different values. It was like watching language itself break. And again, the winners and losers were not random. People paid in fresh dollars or with relatives abroad had a better chance. People paid in local currency, pensioners, and salaried workers fully trapped inside the formal banking web were hammered. The same mechanism, different country, different decade, same invisible knife. Most people will never know what you now know. Most people will keep trusting systems they do not understand. If you are still here, you're not most people. Hit subscribe. Because the next section is the part this channel was made for, the part they never put in textbooks. Now look at all three together. Germany in 1923, Argentina in 2001, Lebanon after 2019. On the surface, separate tragedies. But beneath the surface, the same engine keeps turning. A society stores everyday safety in claims. In 1923, Argentina in 2001, Lebanon after 2019. On the surface, they look like separate tragedies with separate cultures, separate politics, separate headlines. But beneath the surface, the same engine keeps turning. A society stores everyday safety in claims. Claims on cash, claims on banks, claims on wages, claims on pensions. Then the larger system above those claims becomes overstretched through debt, money creation, external pressure, or reliance on constant new inflows. When the strain becomes unbearable, the losses have to go somewhere. Sometimes those losses arrive through inflation. That is Weimar. Sometimes through broken pegs and frozen deposits. That is Argentina. Sometimes through banking paralysis and currency collapse in a dollarized society. That is Lebanon. Sometimes they arrive through quieter legal language. In Cyprus in 2013, depositors and troubled banks lost billions in a bail-in, which means savers were forced to absorb bank losses. Reuters reported that about 3.4 billion euros in deposits at Laiki Bank were wiped out, while 47.5% of Bank of Cyprus deposits above 100,000 euros were converted into equity. A bank account became an involuntary rescue package, and sometimes the same logic appears as access control. In Greece in June 2015, banks shut and withdrawals were capped at 60 euros a day. Debit and credit card payments inside Greece were allowed, but transfers abroad were heavily restricted. Again, notice the pattern. The crisis does not always say, your money is gone. Sometimes it says, your money is still there, but your range of motion is gone. You can watch it, you just cannot use it freely. At this point, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Modern financial fragility is not only about losing wealth, it is about losing options. And when options disappear, the people hurt most are usually those whose lives run on timing. The pensioner who needs medicine this week, the shop owner who must pay a supplier today, the worker whose rent is due on Friday. A crisis is not only a hole in a balance sheet, it is a trapdoor under daily life. This brings us directly to the human cost. Who gets hit first when the system bends? Not the people with 10 lawyers and accounts in 3 jurisdictions. Usually not the people with offshore access, foreign income, or portfolios spread across asset classes, which simply means different kinds of holdings, rather than one single bet. The first casualties are the people standing closest to the paycheck. Look back at Greece. Reuters described stunned citizens waking to shuttered banks, long supermarket lines, and overwhelming uncertainty. Pensioners waited outside bank branches hoping to access payments. A plumber named Yannis Kalaizakis stood outside an empty cash machine with €5 in his pocket and said, "I don't know what else to say. It's a mess." Businesses complained they could not pay salaries or suppliers and had to halt imports. Agricultural production was expected to be affected. When a financial system seizes up, the economy does not pause gracefully. It coughs, stalls, and starts starving the edges. Look at Cyprus in 2013. Many people outside the island treated it like a technical story about rich depositors and bank restructuring, but the language hid the human truth. Some savers woke to find that money above the insurance threshold was no longer fully theirs. At Lakey Bank, about €3.4 billion in deposits were wiped out. At Bank of Cyprus, nearly half of uninsured deposits were turned into shares. Shares are not cash. They are ownership claims, whose value can rise or fall and may be impossible to use for rent, payroll, or school fees. For a business owner, that distinction can feel like being handed a bicycle wheel when you asked for bread. The middle class is often where these shocks cut deepest. Poor households have fewer buffers, of course, and they suffer terribly. But the middle class suffers a special kind of break. It loses not only income, but confidence in the ladder itself. The office worker who trusted a pension, the pharmacist who trusted inventory financing, the family that saved for a home down payment, the small entrepreneur who kept 6 months of cash in the local bank. They built according to the blueprint they were given. Then the blueprint caught fire. Even in countries that do not look like classic monetary breakdowns, the same pattern can appear. In the United States, during the Great Recession, the mechanism was different, but the effect rhymed. The more a family's survival depends on one pipe staying open, the more dangerous it becomes when history reaches for the valve. And if you want to know why this history still matters, look at the shape of modern life. By 2021, the World Bank found that 76% of adults worldwide had an account. In developing economies, the share of adults making or receiving digital payments had risen from 35% in 2014 to 57% in 2021. That is progress. It means more inclusion, faster payments, and less dependence on cash. But it also means more of daily survival now rests inside institutions, networks, and rule books that most people never examine. More wages arrive electronically. More bills are auto-paid. More households hold their entire emergency buffer as digits in one place. At the same time, the old fragilities have not disappeared. The S&P survey still found that only 33% of adults worldwide were financially literate. In developing economies, only 55% could access extra emergency funds within 30 days without much difficulty. So the modern world has become like a taller building with better lighting, but the same narrow stairwells. More people are inside the financial system than ever before. Many still do not understand how it works, and many still do not have a second exit when the main door jams. That is why these historical episodes rhyme so loudly with the present. Not because every country is about to become Weimar Germany or Lebanon. History is never a photocopy. It is more like an echo in a canyon. The words are not identical, but the shape that throws them back is the same. Heavy debt, concentrated exposure, faith in access, and ordinary households storing their future in promises they did not design. The question is not whether this pattern will repeat. History has already answered that. The only question is whether you will see it before it sees you. If this channel helps you think differently about the world you live in, subscribe. It costs nothing. And it might change everything. So what did the survivors do differently? Not perfectly, not always consciously, and not in ways that can be copied one for one across every country and every era. But the historical record shows that those who came through these periods largely shared 3 characteristics. First, they understood that not all safety is visible. They did not confuse a calm interface with a strong structure. In Weimar, those holding productive assets or land were often in a different position from those holding only cash. In Argentina, people with actual dollar notes, export-linked income, or assets outside the frozen banking web often had more flexibility. In Lebanon, fresh dollars and outside income streams mattered enormously. The pattern is simple. Survivors tended to own or access things that did not depend entirely on one local promise being honored tomorrow morning. Second, they kept optionality. Optionality is just a technical word for room to move. A household with some cash, some hard assets, low debt, useful skills, and multiple ways to earn has more optionality than a household whose life is locked inside one institution. In crises, optionality is like having several doors in a burning room. You may not need all of them. You only need one open when the smoke arrives. Third, they watched incentives instead of slogans. When a government promises stability while debt explodes, when banks offer unusually high returns, when a currency peg survives only because confidence has not yet broken, history suggests caution. The people who survive best are often not prophets. They are people who notice when the official story and the underlying math stop agreeing. They listen for the crack in the engine before the car stops on the highway. This is not financial advice. It is historical pattern recognition. And the pattern is clear. The people who came through these storms were rarely the people who trusted most. They were often the people who depended least on a single point of failure. They built lives that could bend. They treated institutions with respect, but not innocence. They knew that a portfolio, a job, a pension, a bank, or even a currency can be sturdy like oak in one decade and brittle like dry chalk in the next. Which brings us back to that Athens plumber on the morning of June 29th, 2015. By lunchtime, those rules had shifted. His money was still his in-law, but in practice, the system had placed a hand over the tap. That image matters because the center of economic history is the ordinary person discovering, often too late, that the structure carrying their savings was less like a vault and more like a theater set. History suggests that when the next period of strain arrives, the biggest surprise will not be that systems come under pressure, but how many people believed pressure was impossible. Stability is not resilience. Access is not ownership. A number on a screen is not purchasing power. Collapse is rarely a thunderclap. It is a river changing course while most people are still building on the old bank. This is historical and educational analysis. It is not financial advice. Every individual situation is different. Please consult a qualified professional before making any financial decision. Subscribe for more.